My name is Mason Ashford. I'm 26 years old, a freelance designer living in a small apartment in the heart of Madison, Wisconsin. Madison is a city of shimmering lakes, cobblestone streets, and fiery red maples in the fall that make me feel like I'm walking inside a painting. The air is often fragrant with roasted coffee drifting from corner shops, and misty mornings roll across the water like something out of a dream. Yet what makes Madison meaningful to me has never been its beauty. It is the memories I carry of a once close-knit family of Thanksgivings around a crowded dinner table, laughter bouncing off the walls, and my grandparents' home glowing with warmth. Those memories now exist only in fragments, and every year I struggle to piece them back together, knowing too much has changed. I was born and raised in Janesville, a small town about an hour's drive from Madison. My childhood was simple, filled with white wooden houses, endless fields of barley, and church bells that rang faithfully every Sunday morning. My parents, Greg and my biological mother, had once been the kind of couple admired by everyone in town. Dad was tall with a deep, warm voice, a mechanic at the local garage who came home each evening with oil-stained hands and stories to tell. My mom was gentle with golden hair and a smile that filled the kitchen whenever she baked. I believed their love was unshakable, but when I was 10, my world shattered. One evening I came home to find a note on the kitchen table in my mother's careful handwriting. She needed a different life, it said. She left us without looking back. I have never blamed her, but I have never understood why she left not just Dad, but me too. My father changed after that day. He grew quieter sometimes, irritable, often sitting alone in the living room with a beer in his hand, the glow of the TV his only companion. I learned to take care of myself riding my bike to school, doing my own homework, and pretending the sadness didn't creep in when the nights grew too quiet. Thankfully, I still had my grandparents Marilyn and Henry Ashford, who lived in Monroe, a rural town 2 hours away. Their home became my refuge. Every Thanksgiving I would escape to that old wooden house where I was reminded that family still meant something. My grandfather Henry was a retired math teacher, a quiet, meticulous man who wore a suit to every holiday, always fussing with his tie in the mirror until Grandma teased him. He had a habit of scribbling equations on napkins whenever I asked for help with homework, his toothless grin lighting up whenever I solved a problem. My grandmother Marilyn was the opposite, warm, bustling, her laughter filling every room. Her roasted chicken with crispy skin and the aroma of herbs was unforgettable, and her pumpkin pie with its golden crust and sweet filling always came with an extra slice just for me. Those evenings by the fireplace, surrounded by laughter and the smell of good food, were the happiest moments of my childhood. But as the years passed, Dad remarried. Darlene came into our lives like a storm, brassy, blonde hair, sharp voice, and an air of superiority that grated against everything familiar. She had opinions about everything: how Dad should organize the garage, how I should tie my shoes, and even how my grandparents should behave. She dismissed them with cutting words, once sneering that they were just country folk stuck in that backwater town, knowing nothing but planting potatoes and raising chickens. Her contempt was like a poison that spread through the family. Our tradition of gathering at my grandparents' house began to unravel. Darlene refused to drive 2 hours to Monroe, complaining the trip wasted gas and that their home was cramped and smelled of the kitchen. Instead, she insisted they come to Janesville if they wanted to see us. Grandpa would quietly nod his eyes, revealing the hurt he never voiced, while Grandma tried to keep the peace by bringing a plate of pie to every visit. But the warmth was fading. Thanksgivings no longer meant laughter by the fireplace or Grandpa's stories. It became Darlene's show, her rules, her relatives. This year was no different. Thanksgiving was at Dad's house, arranged by Darlene as always. I drove from Madison with a bottle of wine and a bouquet of white daisies, eager for even the smallest chance to see my grandparents again. In my mind, I pictured Grandpa adjusting his tie. Grandma bustling in the kitchen, her smile bright as she set out pie. The drive was beautiful sunlight spilling through red maples, as though the world itself was welcoming a day of reunion. But as soon as I arrived, I knew something was wrong. Their old pickup truck was missing from the driveway. Instead, shiny new cars lined the curb. Inside, bright chandelier light and loud festive music replaced the warmth I remembered. The smell of roasted turkey hung in the air, but it was flat strange, lacking the familiar, herby comfort of Grandma's cooking. The living room was filled, not with family, but with Darlene's relatives, loud and laughing, her parents and cousins in flashy suits. Darlene herself strutted around in a red dress, her heels clicking as she barked orders like a director on set. And in the corner, Dad sat with a can of beer, his eyes glued to the football game on the TV. I stood frozen at the door, the bouquet suddenly feeling foolish in my hands. My heart ached as I scanned the room, desperate for my grandparents' familiar faces. But they were nowhere to be found. I carried the bouquet into the living room, though it felt out of place among the glittering decorations and strangers' laughter. Every year my grandparents had been the first to arrive, Grandpa with his tie slightly crooked, Grandma bustling in the kitchen with pie. But tonight, their absence was deafening. I walked over to Dad, keeping my voice calm, though my chest felt tight. I asked where Grandma and Grandpa were. He barely looked up, annoyance flickering in his eyes. "They're busy. They couldn't come," he muttered before turning back to the game. The words cut through me. Busy? My grandparents had never missed a Thanksgiving, not once, not in rain or snow. Just a week ago, Grandma had called telling me with excitement about Grandpa's new green tie. I knew in my bones they wouldn't be too busy for this day. Before I could press further, Darlene swept in beside me, her hand heavy on my shoulder, her smile sweet, but her eyes sharp. "Mason, don't just stand there. Come try some pie. I worked on it all day," she said. I nodded absently, though my mind was already spinning. Something was terribly wrong. Dinner passed in a blur. I sat at the table surrounded by Darlene's relatives, boasting about jobs and vacations, while Darlene spoke eagerly about buying a new house with Dad. I forced myself to nod, but the dry turkey on my plate reminded me of everything I had lost. I wanted to stand up, drive to Monroe, and see for myself why my grandparents weren't here. My heart wouldn't rest otherwise. And then my phone buzzed. The name on the screen made my pulse race. Grandma, she never called during dinner, especially on Thanksgiving. I excused myself and hurried into the hallway, the music fading behind me. "Grandma, are you okay?" I asked. What I heard chilled me to the bone, her voice trembling, broken by sobs. "Mason, Grandpa, he fell, he's unconscious. The ambulance is on its way. I don't know what to do." The image hit me like a punch. I pictured their old wooden porch in Monroe, the weathered steps where I'd sat as a child, listening to Grandpa's stories. Now, he lay there unconscious. My voice shook as I promised her I was coming. I hung up and rushed back to the living room where laughter and football still filled the air. My heart pounded as I told Dad what had happened. "Grandpa fell. He's unconscious. Come with me. We have to go." I was pleading, desperate for him to move. But he didn't. He just glanced up, annoyance in his eyes, and said flatly, "We're in the middle of a party, Mason. Don't make a big deal out of it. He'll be fine." Then he turned back to the TV. I stared at him, stunned, the words echoing like an insult. This was his father, the man who raised him, and he brushed it aside like nothing. Darlene stepped closer, her syrupy voice grating in my ears. "Mason, what's wrong, honey? Don't be so tense. Come back and eat before the turkey gets cold." Her smile was polite, but her eyes warned me not to ruin her evening. I had no more patience for their games. I grabbed my coat and keys, ignoring her calls as I bolted out the door. The cold November night hit me like a wall as I jumped into my car and sped toward Monroe. The road was dark, lined with frost-covered fields, the mist clinging to the headlights as though trying to hold me back. My phone buzzed again. "Grandma," I pulled to the side and answered with trembling hands. "I'm on my way." "How's Grandpa?" I asked. "The ambulance just arrived," she said through tears. "He's still not awake. Please hurry." Her voice broke, and so did my heart. I pressed the gas harder, every mile stretching like an eternity. By the time I reached Monroe, red flashing lights pierced the night. Their familiar house stood in shadow, the porch now crowded with paramedics lifting Grandpa onto a stretcher. He looked pale, motionless, still dressed neatly in his suit, his green tie crooked as though he had been preparing for something. The sight crushed me. Grandma stood trembling on the porch, sobbing into her hands. I ran to her and wrapped her in my arms. "Grandma, I'm here. Don't be scared. We'll get through this." Her icy fingers clung to mine as she whispered, "Mason, I don't know if he'll make it. He kept going out to the porch saying he had to wait for them to change their minds." Her words sent a shiver through me. Change their minds. Change their minds about what I didn't have time to ask because a paramedic urged us to follow to the hospital. I helped Grandma into the ambulance sitting beside her as the siren wailed through the freezing night. Inside, the cramped space was filled with the beeping of machines and the pale light of fluorescent bulbs. Grandpa lay unconscious on the stretcher, his face calm but distant, his chest rising faintly with each breath. I gripped Grandma's hand, my mind racing with questions and anger. Why had he been dressed in his suit waiting outside in the cold? What had he meant about waiting for someone to change their minds? And why could Dad, his own son, sit unmoved at a party while this was happening? The night stretched endlessly as we sped toward Monroe's small hospital, and I knew that when the truth came out, it would not be easy to accept. The hospital in Monroe was small, its white walls peeling the air, thick with antiseptic. We were ushered into a cold waiting room with plastic chairs lined in rows, the only sound the faint buzz of fluorescent lights. Grandpa was taken behind the glass doors of the emergency room, and the sight of them closing shut on him made my chest feel like it had been split in two. Grandma sat stiffly in one of the chairs, her frail hands clasped together as though in prayer. I knelt in front of her, trying to catch her gaze. "Grandma, tell me what happened. Why did Grandpa fall? And what did you mean when you said he kept waiting for them to change their minds?" She looked at me, her eyes glistening with tears, not of panic anymore, but of deep, heavy sorrow. She took a shaky breath before speaking. "Darlene called yesterday," she said softly, her voice breaking on every word. "She told us not to come this year, said there wasn't room, too many people. She told us to stay home, that we were too old, that we wouldn't fit the festive atmosphere." She lowered her gaze, her shoulders trembling. I tried to reason with her, Mason. I begged her. I told her we'd bring pie, that we wouldn't be a burden. But she wouldn't listen. Her words cut through me. I felt the blood drain from my face. "And Dad?" I asked, though my voice trembled because I already feared the answer. Grandma nodded, tears spilling down her cheeks. "He agreed with her. He told us to stay home, that he'd visit after the holiday. Your grandfather put on his suit anyway, picked out his green tie. He kept stepping out onto the porch, saying maybe they'd change their minds, maybe they'd call. He waited in the cold until he slipped on the stairs." She covered her face with her hands, sobbing. I ran outside and he was lying there motionless. I thought I had lost him. The image burned itself into me. Grandpa proud, even in his old age, dressed neatly, standing on that porch in the November cold, waiting for a call that would never come, waiting for his son to remember him, waiting for dignity that never arrived. My throat tightened so much I could barely speak. I held Grandma's trembling hands, my own anger boiling inside me. "They banned you," I whispered, still not believing. "They told you not to come." She nodded again, silent this time. My chest ached with a fury I had never felt before. Dad had always been quiet since Mom left, but I never thought he could be this cruel to cast out the very people who had raised him. The waiting stretched endlessly, each minute heavier than the last. Finally, the doctor emerged through the swinging doors, his voice steady but urgent. "Mrs. Ashford, your husband is stable. He has a fractured rib and a mild head injury, but he is not in critical condition. He needs observation for a few days. You can see him now." Relief washed over me like a tidal wave. Grandma sobbed again, this time with gratitude, and I helped her to her feet as we followed the doctor into the small hospital room. Grandpa lay in bed, pale but awake. His green tie loosened his suit still on, as though he had refused to remove it even after the fall. When he saw me, his lips curved into a faint smile. "Mason," he whispered, his voice weak but warm. "You came. I knew you would." Tears burned my eyes as I sat beside him, taking his hand. "I should have come sooner," I whispered. "I should have known." He shook his head slowly, squeezing my hand with fragile strength. "It's not your fault. I just wanted to see you and your father. I thought maybe they'd changed their minds." Grandma stood at his side, brushing a tear from her cheek, trying to smile for him. I forced myself to smile too, though inside I was breaking. I tried to keep the conversation light, telling Grandpa about my design work, the little projects that filled my days in Madison. But my mind kept circling back to Grandma's confession, to Dad's cold indifference at the party. Later, when Grandpa drifted into a light sleep, Grandma sat beside me in the waiting room again. She looked weary, her shawl slipping off her shoulders. "Mason," she whispered, "don't be angry with your father. He's struggling. He and Darlene say they have debts expenses. I thought if I helped them, maybe things would be better." Her words puzzled me until her phone buzzed on the seat beside her. She didn't notice, but I did. A message from Dad. I picked it up and glanced at the screen. "Mom sent $200 for the electric bill." "Thanks." My blood ran cold. I scrolled through the thread, my chest tightening with each message. 3 years of requests, hundreds upon hundreds, thousands in total. "Mom, I need $500 for car repairs. Mom, Tommy's tuition is $1,200. Please send it soon." Mom, water bill jumped $150. Help. Over 50 messages, each one a demand. My grandparents, living on modest pensions, had been quietly financing Dad and Darlene's life for years while being treated as burdens. And tonight, banned from Thanksgiving, Grandpa had stood on the porch, waiting for a call that never came. I set the phone down, my hands trembling, rage swelling inside me. "Grandma," I said gently but firmly, "this has to stop. They're taking advantage of you." She lowered her head, tears sliding down her cheeks. "I know," she whispered, "but he's my son. I didn't want him to suffer." I took her hand, my voice unsteady but resolute. "He's not suffering. He's exploiting you, and I won't let him do it anymore." The hospital room felt colder after I saw those messages. I couldn't sit still. My chest burned with anger. My grandparents, who lived quietly on pensions in a vegetable garden, had been carrying Dad and Darlene's bills for years while being treated like outcasts. And now, after being banned from Thanksgiving, Grandpa had nearly lost his life waiting for a son who would never call. A few days later, Grandpa was stable enough to stay under observation, so Grandma and I spent nights in the waiting room. The days were slow and heavy, filled with the sound of squeaking carts and the antiseptic sting in the air. Each morning I bought her coffee from the vending machine, watching her grow weaker under the weight of everything she carried. She still defended Dad in whispers, insisting he was under pressure, that Darlene's family needed help. I wanted to believe she didn't see the truth, but I knew she saw it. She just didn't want to admit her son could be this cruel. One evening, while I was peeling potatoes for Grandma in the small hospital kitchen, her phone buzzed again. This time she reached for it before I could. Dad's name glowed on the screen. She stared at it, her eyes wavering. Then she looked at me, her expression torn between pain and a determination I hadn't seen before. "No, Mason," she whispered, her voice trembling but firm. "I'll answer this one." She pressed the button and put it on speaker, her hands shaking. Dad's voice came through, sharp, impatient. "Mom, what's going on? Why haven't this month's bills been paid? Electricity, water, Tommy's tuition, they've all bounced. What did you do to the account?" Grandma drew in a breath, steadying herself. "Greg," She said, her voice calm, but with an edge I had never heard from her before. "We've stopped the payments. Your father and I can't cover your expenses anymore. You need to handle things on your own." There was silence on the line, long and suffocating. Then, Dad's voice erupted louder, now filled with anger. "What are you talking about? You can't do that. Our family depends on you. Darlene needs that money for the new house. You're abandoning your responsibility to us. Aren't you ashamed?" I clenched my fists so tightly, my nails dug into my palms. Shame, he dared accuse her of shame when he had drained her of everything she had left. I wanted to grab the phone to shout, but Grandma raised her frail hand to stop me. Her eyes, though wet with tears, were steady. "Greg," she said, still calm, but unyielding. "We've done enough. More than enough. We paid for your house, your cars, your son's tuition, and yet you didn't even invite us to Thanksgiving. You didn't check on your father when he collapsed. If this is family responsibility, then I've misunderstood the word all my life." The silence stretched again, but then Darlene's sugary voice slid into the call, smooth but calculating. "Mom, don't be upset. You know we're struggling. Just help a few more months, then we'll manage. Please don't let us lose our house. You don't want your family homeless, do you?" Her words were poison. I could feel my anger ready to explode, but Grandma's lips curved into the faintest, most resolute smile I had ever seen. "Darlene," she said softly, "I've said it already. No more. You'll figure it out." And with that, she ended the call. No hesitation, no second guessing. She set the phone down on the table as if she'd just placed a final stone on a grave. Her shoulders trembled, tears spilled down her cheeks, but in her eyes I saw something I had never seen before. Freedom. I reached across the table, holding her hands. "Grandma, I'm proud of you," I said, my voice thick. "You've carried too much for too long. You don't have to anymore. I'll be here always." She nodded, the tears streaming freely now, but her voice steady. "I was wrong, Mason. I thought if I kept helping Greg, maybe the family would stay together. But all I did was let him hurt us more. Your grandfather needs me now. And so do you. I can't keep giving everything to someone who only takes." That night I sat awake in the waiting room watching Grandma sleep in her chair, her face finally softened by a kind of peace. My anger toward Dad grew heavier, but it was mixed now with pity. He had chosen greed, pride, and Darlene's demands over the very people who loved him unconditionally, and the weight of that choice was no longer ours to bear. The next morning when Grandpa opened his eyes and asked softly about Thanksgiving, Grandma and I exchanged a glance. She smiled gently, brushing his hand. "We had our own Thanksgiving, Henry. Mason was with us." He nodded faintly, a weak smile tugging at his lips. I knew he understood more than he let on. But I also knew the confrontation with Dad was not over. He would come eventually, and when he did, the truth would have to be spoken face to face. The days passed slowly in Monroe's small hospital, but Grandpa grew stronger. He sat up more often, sipping tea that Grandma brought in a thermos from home. I spent my hours between his bedside and the waiting room, making sure Grandma ate and slept. For the first time in years, I felt as though I was where I belonged, beside them, protecting them, filling the empty space my father had left. A week after the fall, we returned for Grandpa's follow-up visit. He was thinner, but steadier, his eyes brighter than before. Grandma fussed over his coat, making sure he was warm enough, while I carried his bag and tried to ease her worries. We were in the hallway outside his room when I saw them, Dad and Darlene. They walked toward us, Darlene in a pristine white sweater and curled hair, Dad looking tired but defiant, his jaw set as if he had come to stake a claim. I felt my stomach tighten, my hands balling into fists. Before they could step inside, I moved into the hallway to block them. "Dad." "Darlene," I said, my voice cold. "What are you doing here?" Dad frowned, his eyes narrowing. "Mason, move aside. I'm here to see my father." I stood firm. "See him if you cared, you would have come on Thanksgiving night when he collapsed. Not now, a week later." Darlene's voice slid in, honeyed and defensive. "Mason, don't be unfair. Your dad's been busy. We have so much to deal with. You don't understand the pressure we're under." I laughed bitterly, unable to contain it. Busy? Busy throwing parties while Grandpa lay unconscious, busy banning them from Thanksgiving. Don't you dare talk to me about pressure. Dad's eyes hardened. That's enough. You don't get to speak to Darlene that way. But I didn't back down. I stepped closer, my voice shaking but strong. No, Dad. I'm telling the truth. Grandpa put on his suit, stood on the cold porch waiting for you to change your mind, waiting for your call. Instead, he slipped and nearly died while you sat in your chair drinking beer. Do you know what he was waiting for? He was waiting for you. For a moment, Dad froze. His eyes flickered, his mouth opening as though to speak, but Darlene grabbed his arm and spoke quickly, her words sharp. Mason, you're exaggerating. We only wanted things organized. Your grandparents are old. It's not convenient for them to travel. We didn't want them uncomfortable, that's all. Organized, I snapped. Or did you just not want them embarrassing you in front of your guests? You've been living off their money for years, your house, your cars, your son's tuition, and yet you treated them like they were disposable. Dad's face reddened, his voice rising. Stop it, Mason. You don't know what you're talking about. This is family business. You're too young to understand. I almost laughed at the words, but it wasn't amusement, it was disgust. Too young, no dad. I see clearly now. You chose Darlene over your parents. You let them suffer in silence, and I won't let it happen again. At that moment, Grandma stepped out of the hospital room, her frail figure, steady, her eyes calm but sharp. Greg, she said, her voice soft but unshakable. I don't want to see you today. Go home. Her words hung in the air like a stone dropped into still water. Dad stared at her, stunned, as though he couldn't believe she had spoken them. Darlene's mouth opened in protest, but no words came. They lingered for only a moment longer, then turned and walked down the hallway, their footsteps echoing against the sterile walls. I stood there, my chest heaving, watching them disappear. For the first time in my life, I saw Grandma straighten her shoulders as though a burden had finally lifted from her back. I felt both pride and heartbreak, knowing how much pain it had taken for her to say those words. When we went back into Grandpa's room, he looked up at me with tired but shining eyes. A faint smile touched his lips. Mason, he whispered, you did it. Your grandma needed you to stand strong. I took his hand, fighting back tears. I just want you both safe, Grandpa. I won't let anyone hurt you again. That evening, as I sat with them in the quiet of their hospital room, I realized something had shifted. A line had been drawn, one that could never be crossed back. The family I thought I knew was gone, but in its place stood something new, fragile but real, built not on obligation, but on love. The confrontation at the hospital stayed with me long after Dad and Darlene disappeared down the hallway. For Grandma, the act of sending them away had been like tearing open an old wound, but also like setting down a weight she had carried for too long. For me, it was a moment of clarity. I knew then that I could no longer stand by in silence, not while my grandparents were being drained of their money, their dignity, and their place in the family they had built. After Grandpa was discharged, I stayed in Monroe, sleeping on the creaky old sofa in their wooden house. The fields around us were frosted white. The wind whistled through the pines, and the air inside carried the faint scent of pine and pumpkin pie. It was simple, far from the bustle of Madison, but it felt like home. Each day I helped Grandma with chores, made sure Grandpa rested, and took on the small responsibilities they could no longer manage. When Grandpa was strong enough, I checked their bank account, canceling every automatic payment Dad had set up one by one. The screen showed line after line of transfers, tuition, car repairs, utilities, all quietly paid for years. Each time I clicked cancel, I felt both a pang of sorrow and a spark of resolve. At first, Grandma flinched when I explained what I was doing, as though breaking a sacred duty. Mason, she whispered, what if your father can't manage without us? I took her hand gently, looking into her weary eyes. Grandma, he's not managing, he's exploiting. You've given enough. Now it's time he faces the life he's chosen. She held my hand tightly, and I saw in her face the slow dawning of acceptance, a resignation mixed with relief. The calls came soon after. Dad's voice sharp with anger, demanding why the payments had stopped. "Mom, you can't do this. Darlene and I need that money. You'll ruin us." But this time, Grandma stood firm. "Greg," she said calmly, "your father and I are old. We've sacrificed enough. You have to manage on your own." When Darlene's voice chimed in, pleading with sugary tones about losing their house, Grandma didn't waver. She simply hung up. For the first time, she chose herself and Grandpa over her son's endless demands. I watched her in awe. She had always been gentle, soft-spoken, the peacekeeper, but beneath that gentleness was a resilience I hadn't truly seen until now. She turned to me afterward, her eyes glistening with tears. "Mason, I've given too much of myself to your father. I don't regret loving him, but I regret letting him hurt us. Now I want to live for your grandfather and for you." I hugged her, feeling pride swell in my chest. "I'll always be here, Grandma. You won't face this alone again." The days that followed settled into a rhythm. I cooked with Grandma, helped Grandpa walk around the porch for exercise, and spent evenings by the fire listening to old stories. But the more time I spent in Monroe, the less Madison pulled at me. My apartment in the city, the coffee shops, the cobblestone streets, they felt distant, hollow, compared to the quiet strength of this place. It was during one of those days while fixing the porch steps where Grandpa had fallen that a neighbor named Walter stopped by. He was an elderly farmer with a basket of apples in hand and a curious look in his eye. "I hear you're a designer," he said. "I need a logo for my farm. The ones I find online look terrible. Could you help me?" I smiled and agreed. That evening I sketched a rustic apple tree, simple but refined, and sent it to him. He loved it, and within a week word spread across Monroe. Local shopkeepers, farmers, even a cooperative in Janesville began contacting me for logos, packaging, and websites. They told me my designs felt like home authentic and modern at once. Soon, my small wooden house in Monroe became a studio, papers and sketches scattered across the table. For the first time, my work felt meaningful, not chasing big contracts in Madison, but supporting small businesses, families, and neighbors who poured their hearts into what they built. One afternoon, while I was at the local farmers market taking photos for an advertisement, I met Clara. She stood behind a stall selling homemade strawberry jam, her brown hair tied back, her smile as warm as the summer sun. "You're a Mason, right?" she asked. "Walter says you made that apple logo everyone's talking about." I laughed, embarrassed. "He's too kind." "Did you make this jam yourself?" She nodded proudly, handing me a jar. "Picked, cooked, and bottled by me. Try it, you'll see." I tasted it, and it was as sweet and fragrant as Grandma's kitchen in my childhood. I lingered at her stall longer than I meant to, drawn to her laughter, her stories about farming, her quiet strength. Unlike the women I'd met in Madison, Clara was grounded, resilient, unafraid of muddy boots or hard work. There was something about her that reminded me of Grandma, kind, but unshakably strong. That evening, as I walked home carrying the jar of jam, I felt a strange lightness in my chest. For the first time in years, the weight of loss and betrayal didn't consume me. Instead, I felt a spark of hope, the beginning of something new. The weeks turned into months, and Clara became a part of my days in ways I hadn't expected. At first, we met casually at the farmer's market where she sold jam and honey. But soon I found excuses to stop by her family's farm a few miles from Monroe, where rows of strawberry fields stretched under the sun. She would tease me about how clumsy I was picking berries, showing me how to twist them gently so I didn't bruise the fruit. We laughed in the fields, our hands sticky with juice, the air fragrant with earth and grass. Clara wasn't flashy. She wore plaid shirts and muddy boots, her hair tied back, and she often smelled faintly of sugar from boiling jam. Yet she carried herself with a quiet resilience I couldn't look away from. She'd taken over her parents' farm after they retired, keeping the land alive through hard work and long nights. "Here people live for each other," she said one evening as we sat on a wooden bench outside her farmhouse, sharing a jar of jam under the stars. If you help someone, they help you back. That's how life should be. I found myself opening up to her, telling her about Madison, about the fractured family I'd left behind, about the night Grandpa fell waiting for Dad's call. She listened without judgment, her eyes soft but steady. "You're like your grandma," she said quietly. "Strong not because you want to be, but because you have to protect the people you love." Her words sank deep into me, filling spaces I hadn't realized were still raw. Before long, she was coming by my grandparents' house with baskets of fruit or jars of jam, sitting with us by the fire while Grandpa told his stories. Grandma loved her immediately. "That girl's like me when I was young," she whispered one night after Clara left. "Kind but strong. Don't let her slip away, Mason." I didn't. A year later, I asked Clara to marry me in her strawberry field, the sunset turning the sky to fire. I didn't have a diamond ring or a dramatic gesture, just a simple silver band engraved with a tiny strawberry and a trembling voice as I asked, "Clara, will you stay with me? Build a family with me?" She laughed through her tears, throwing her arms around me. "You're such an idiot," she said, her voice breaking with joy. "But you're my idiot." Yes, our wedding took place that summer in Monroe, not in a hotel ballroom, but in the field behind my grandparents' house. Neighbors brought food and music, long wooden tables were set under the maple trees, and Grandma cooked as though the feast were for the whole world. She roasted chicken, baked her pumpkin pie, and proudly set out jars of Clara's jam alongside the bread. Grandpa, walking slowly with his cane, gave a short speech, his voice trembling but proud. "Mason and Clara remind us that family is where the heart belongs," he said. His words brought cheers and laughter from everyone gathered. Clara wore a simple white dress, her hair crowned with wildflowers, radiant in her plain beauty. I wore a suit with Grandpa's green tie, the same one he had chosen that terrible Thanksgiving, but this time it felt like a symbol of redemption, not heartbreak. We danced under the sunlight, to the sound of fiddles and accordions, surrounded by neighbors who had become more like family than I could have imagined. Dad and Darlene weren't there. I hadn't invited them, and they hadn't reached out, but their absence didn't haunt me. Looking around at Grandma beaming, Grandpa smiling through tears, Clara's hand in mine, I knew I wasn't missing anything. The family I needed was here. That night after the guests had gone and the stars hung low over Monroe, Clara and I sat with my grandparents by the fireplace. Grandma reached across the table to take my hand. "I never thought I'd see this day," she said softly, her eyes glistening. "You've given me a new family, Mason. You've given us a second chance." I looked at her, at Grandpa dozing with a faint smile, at Clara resting her head on my shoulder, and felt a peace I had never known. For years, I thought family was something you had to hold together at all costs, even when it hurt. But now I understood family wasn't about blood or obligation. It was about the people who stayed, who loved you without condition. And in that simple wooden house in Monroe, I realized I had everything I'd ever been searching for. Life in Monroe found its rhythm, and with it came a sense of belonging I had never felt in Madison. My small wooden house, just 10 minutes from my grandparents', became both home and studio. The living room filled with sketches, computers, and scraps of paper as local farmers, bakers, and shopkeepers asked me to design logos, packaging, and websites for them. What had started with Walter's Apple logo grew into a steady stream of work that not only paid the bills, but connected me more deeply to this community. Each project felt personal, a story worth telling. Clara became my partner in every sense. She managed orders, helped me photograph products, and sold her jam at markets across the region. In the evenings, we returned to my grandparents' house, where Grandma always had a kettle on, and Grandpa insisted on telling at least one story from his youth before bed. It was a quiet life, but it was rich with meaning. Sometimes, while fixing a roof shingle with Grandpa watching or peeling potatoes with Grandma in the kitchen, I thought back to the boy I had been, the boy waiting for his mother to return, the young man sitting quietly, while his father drank in silence, the grandson standing in a doorway holding flowers at a Thanksgiving that wasn't really Thanksgiving. I realized then how far I had come. Pain had shaped me, but love had saved me. Dad and Darlene never came back into our lives. A few texts arrived from Darlene, long-winded excuses about financial hardship, but I never responded. Grandma once showed me a message from Dad, but she deleted it without hesitation. "I've given him enough," she said simply. "Now I just want to live for your grandfather and you." It wasn't said with bitterness, but with a clarity she had earned through years of sacrifice. One snowy evening, as Clara and I sat by the fire with my grandparents, Grandma placed a plate of pumpkin pie in front of me, just like she always had when I was a boy. Grandpa chuckled, pretending to adjust an invisible tie, a beloved old habit that never faded. "You cut it too big," he teased. "How's an old man supposed to eat this?" But he took a bite anyway, and the four of us laughed together, the sound filling the house with warmth. It struck me then that family wasn't about clinging to what was broken. Family was about choosing who you stood beside, protecting those who protected you, and letting go of what only caused harm. I once thought filial duty meant obeying my father, tolerating his neglect, and carrying his burdens. But now I understood true loyalty sometimes means saying no. No to exploitation, no to betrayal, no to those who don't value your love. As snow fell gently outside, blanketing the fields, I looked around the room, the fire crackling. Clara's hand resting in mine, my grandparents' faces softened with peace and felt whole. My family might not look like the one I was born into, but it was the one I had built, the one that had chosen to stay. And that was enough. If you've listened to my story, I hope you carry this with you. Some people will never change, no matter how much love you give them. But you have the power to choose, to protect the ones who deserve it, to build a life of peace and honesty, and to let go of what weighs you down. Thank you for staying with me until the end of this journey. If my story touched you, please give this video a like, share it with someone who might need to hear it. Subscribe for more stories, and let me know your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear your own reflections about family love and strength.